The words slid out of his mouth without a single tremor. Not a trace of hesitation. Just cold, smooth certainty. I stood in the center of the living room, the same living room I built brick by brick 30 years ago, and watched the boy I raised look at me like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. Everything in that room had a story. The mahogany coffee table, bought after I worked overtime for 6 months. The wall of framed photos, his graduation, his mother's smile, my hand on his shoulder. Even the old rug under my feet, worn out at the corners from all the nights we'd sat here as a family. And yet, in that moment, it all felt foreign. Like I had already been erased. He leaned back on the couch, my couch, his legs casually crossed, phone in hand, smiling at messages from people who hadn't cared about him a day ago. People who suddenly loved him now that he was rich. His eyes were glassy, his grin sharp. A kind of power I'd never seen in him before had settled into his bones. "Dad," he said, like he was giving a kind instruction to an old man who didn't understand the world anymore, "this house is too small. Too old. I've got plans. I'm moving up. You'll be fine. You'll be fine." That's what people say when they're already halfway out the door. I felt the floor tilt beneath me, not because of age, not because of shock, but because something in my chest cracked open quietly. I wanted to laugh. This was the boy who once clung to my leg in fear of thunderstorms. The boy who used to fall asleep on my chest while I told him stories about honor and kindness. And now, here he was, speaking to me like a man dismissing a stranger. The house was silent except for the soft ticking of the old wall clock. A clock his mother picked out the year he was born. Time has a cruel way of standing still in the wrong moments. My throat tightened, but I didn't speak. I watched his face closely, searching for some flicker of guilt, some shadow of the boy I raised. But there was nothing. Just greed, wrapped in a smile that wasn't his anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I just stood there with my hands hanging uselessly at my sides, as if reaching for something that no longer existed. Before I tell you what happened next, before I tell you how those 2 hours changed everything I thought I knew about blood, loyalty, and love, make sure you subscribe. This isn't just a story. It's a warning. I didn't grow up with much. My hands learned to work before they learned to rest, and my back carried the weight of life long before my heart ever dared to complain. When my wife died 18 years ago, the house became more than just bricks and wood. It became a promise, to keep going, to build a safe place for my boy. I raised my son alone. Every lunch he ate, every pair of shoes he wore, every book he ever opened, there was sweat behind it. I gave up promotions, skipped holidays, and said no to myself 100 times so I could say yes to him. That's what fathers do. Not because they expect anything in return, but because love makes sacrifice easy. Our little house wasn't big, but it was ours. He grew up chasing a soccer ball in the front yard, coming home with muddy shoes, shouting, "Dad," the way kids do when they believe home is indestructible. I can still hear the sound of his laughter echoing down the hall on rainy nights when the world outside disappeared, and it was just the two of us against everything. He was a good boy once. Or maybe I was just too proud to see the cracks forming. When he turned 16, things started to shift. Subtle at first. He wanted more than what our modest life could give him. He'd come home talking about expensive cars, houses with pools, vacations people like us couldn't afford. I'd tell him, "Son, good things come slowly. Brick by brick." He'd nod, but his eyes were always somewhere else. Still, I believed he'd find his way. I held on to the idea that a father's love could be enough to anchor him when the world started whispering greed. When he graduated, I handed him the keys to an old truck I'd spent years fixing. He barely said thank you. But I told myself it was just youth. Young men don't always know the value of what they've been given. When he got his first job, he stopped calling me as often. Then he stopped coming home altogether. Birthdays became text messages. Holidays turned into excuses. I told people he was busy. That's what parents do when they're covering for the child they love. And then, slowly, I started noticing the little shifts in the way he spoke to me. Less warmth. Less respect. As if I'd turned into a piece of old furniture in his memory. But even then, I held on. Because no matter how far he drifted, he was still my son. And love, even when it hurts, is stubborn. I remember one night vividly. He came home late, smelling of cologne and expensive whiskey, wearing a new jacket I knew he couldn't afford. He didn't say hello. Just walked straight to the kitchen, poured himself a drink, and said, "Dad, you ever think about how small this place is?" He didn't mean the house. He meant my life. He meant me. It stung. But I let it pass. I told myself it was just talk. Years passed, and he moved back in temporarily after losing a job. The house became crowded with tension, my quiet routines colliding with his careless arrogance. He'd play loud music, leave dishes in the sink, bring people over at odd hours. But I endured it. Because he was my boy. When the lottery came into our lives, it wasn't through some grand plan. Just an ordinary day, the way all storms begin. And before that ticket turned everything upside down, there were moments I replay now in the dark. Moments I should have seen as warnings. But when you love someone, you don't see warning signs. You see memories. You see who they used to be. I didn't know it then, but the boy who once hugged me in the rain was long gone. Replaced by someone who saw love as weakness. And loyalty as something he could discard when money called louder. That house carried everything I ever gave him, my love, my labor, my years. It was supposed to be a legacy. I never imagined it would become the very stage where he'd try to cut me out of my own life. But if I've learned anything in 65 years, it's this: storms don't always announce themselves with thunder. Sometimes they knock on your door looking like your own child. It didn't happen overnight. No, betrayals like this never do. They creep in slowly, like water seeping into the foundation of an old house. You don't notice the damage at first. You just feel the chill. The first real crack showed itself a few years back, the night he came home drunk. I was sitting at the kitchen table, reading the same paper I'd read every night for years, when he stumbled in, laughing like the world belonged to him. He dropped his keys on the floor, looked around like he didn't even recognize the house he'd grown up in. "You ever wonder what it'd be like to live somewhere better than this?" he asked, slurring his words slightly. I gave a small smile, the way a father does when his son's just talking big. "Son, a roof is a roof. What matters is the people under it." He laughed, not the warm laugh I remembered from when he was little. This one was cold. Mocking. "Yeah, well, some people don't want to live under someone else's roof forever." That sentence lodged itself somewhere deep in my chest. At the time, I brushed it off. Told myself it was just alcohol talking. But the truth is, that was the first time I saw it clearly, the distance in his eyes. The hunger. From then on, little things started stacking up like quiet stones on a grave. He stopped calling me Dad. It was "old man" now, said with a smirk that cut deeper than a knife. He started coming home less often, and when he did, it was only to take, never to give. He borrowed money but never paid it back. He ignored my calls but showed up when he needed something. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself he'd come around. That's what parents do, we believe in the soft version of our children long after they've hardened. I remember the day he brought a girl home. She was sharp, pretty, and cold as polished steel. She looked around my house like she was touring a museum she had no intention of visiting again. He called her, the one. During dinner, she leaned back in her chair and said, "So, when are you guys going to sell this place and get something nicer?" I laughed politely, but my son didn't. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Possession. Like the house was already his. Like my years of sacrifice were nothing but a placeholder for the life he thought he deserved. After that night, conversations grew shorter. Colder. He started talking about money a lot. Always money. About how the system favored the rich, about how life was about getting yours before someone else does. I'd try to remind him of the values I'd raised him on: integrity, patience, respect. He'd laugh in my face, shake his head, and say, "That stuff doesn't pay bills, old man." But what stung the most wasn't the disrespect. It was the casual way he spoke of a future where I didn't exist in it. He talked about what he would do with the house, the land, my things, like I was already gone. The final warning sign came a week before everything changed. We were watching TV together, something rare these days. A news story came on about someone winning a massive lottery jackpot. $48 million. He didn't laugh. He didn't scoff. He leaned forward, eyes narrowed like a man staring at a locked door he already planned to break open. "Man, if I ever got that kind of money," he said, "I'd never live like this again." I asked, quietly, "And what about me, son?" He smirked. "Not cruel. Just empty. I'd take care of you, old man. Don't worry. I wouldn't leave you hanging." But it wasn't what he said that told me the truth. It was how he said it. No warmth. No real promise. Just something said to make me stop asking questions. That night I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things. That my boy, the same one I held when he was 5, who used to whisper goodnight against my shoulder, would never push me aside for money. But deep down, a voice I'd spent years ignoring whispered, "Be careful. He's not the boy you raised anymore." I pushed it down. Because that's what fathers do. We love even when love becomes a blade. And a week later, when the numbers rolled out on the television screen and his world turned golden, mine quietly began to crack. It happened on a Wednesday. Just another ordinary day in a life that had started to feel predictable. I woke up early, like I always did, boiled water for tea, and stepped out onto the porch with the creak of the old wooden floor beneath my feet. The air was sharp and still. For all I knew then, it was going to be just another day of quiet routines. My son came downstairs late, half-dressed, one shoe on, scrolling through his phone as he walked. He barely acknowledged me. I'd gotten used to that. He rummaged through the kitchen drawers, sighing loudly when he couldn't find what he was looking for. "Need something?" I asked. He didn't even look at me. "Yeah. Cash. I want to grab some stuff at the gas station." I pulled a few bills from my wallet. "All I've got is 10. He snatched it from my hand with the kind of carelessness that burns more than cruelty. To him, it wasn't $10 I earned working on roofs in the summer sun. It was nothing. He mumbled a "thanks" on his way out and slammed the door behind him. I remember standing in the doorway for a second, just watching the street. It's funny how moments that look meaningless at the time end up being the fault line where everything shifts. When he came back, he tossed a crumpled lottery ticket on the kitchen counter with a bag of snacks. "Why'd you buy that?" I asked. He shrugged. "Why not? Someone's gotta win eventually." There was no significance in his voice. Just boredom. But then, I noticed something, a small detail most people wouldn't have cared about. He'd used my cash, and as he left the store, he told the clerk to write my name on the back of the ticket. I only knew that because he let it slip without thinking. The old lady at the counter made me sign your name. Said something about a payout policy. Weird, huh? He laughed and didn't even realize what he'd just said. I tucked that away. Quietly. "Guess if it wins, I owe you half," he joked. But it didn't sound like a promise. It sounded like someone who believed lightning would never strike them anyway. For the rest of the day, the ticket sat on the counter like a piece of trash. He didn't care enough to even tuck it into his wallet. I watched it whenever I walked past. I don't know why. Something about it felt heavy. That evening, I picked it up and turned it over in my hands. My name, written in blue ink, was scrawled across the back. Messy. Unthinking. A legal claim without him even realizing it. My name. Not his. I set the ticket down again. I didn't know then that this little scrap of paper would be the storm that would rip everything open. Later that night, he was sprawled on the couch, laughing with his friends on the phone. I could hear him talking about what he'd do if he won. The cars. The trips. The women. The house. Not once did I hear the word "us." When I asked him casually if he'd like to watch the drawing together, he waved me off. Why? I never win anything. But sure, if you want. That answer said everything. He didn't believe in the ticket. He didn't believe in anything beyond himself. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and stared at that slip of paper resting carelessly on the counter. It was like staring at a spark and not yet realizing there was a whole forest waiting to burn. The next few days passed without mention of it. Life was the same dull rhythm, his comings and goings, my quiet endurance. But deep down, I had a strange feeling. Something was shifting. And sure enough, the day of the lottery drawing arrived. I remember the way the sun fell across the living room floor as he flicked on the TV, joking with his friends over speakerphone about how rich he was going to be. He didn't even know that the only name that mattered on that ticket wasn't his. It was mine. I sat in my armchair, hands folded, silent. Watching. Waiting. A part of me didn't believe anything would come of it. Another part of me, a quieter, older, wiser part, was listening to the way life sometimes gives warnings long before the explosion. And when those winning numbers started to appear on the screen, one by one, the world tilted. He shouted first. A raw, greedy sound that filled the room. But I didn't shout. I just stared at the TV and at that ticket in his hand. He thought the world had just become his. But he didn't realize whose name the world had actually written on it. The night of the lottery drawing, everything about the house felt strange. It wasn't louder or brighter, but it buzzed, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The TV flickered in the corner, humming softly, while my son paced the living room like a man about to receive a crown. His friends were on speakerphone, voices overlapping, each of them laughing, hyping him up. "Tonight's the night, bro," one of them said through the phone. "You're gonna be rich." He laughed, tossing the ticket in the air and catching it like it was a toy, not realizing it carried something heavier than gold. "Can you not do that?" I said quietly. "What?" "Relax, old man." He smirked, flipping the ticket once more. "You act like this is serious or something." I leaned back in my armchair, watching him. I'd seen that look before, just not on him. It was the look of a man who believed the world owed him something. It didn't belong on my boy's face, but there it was. The countdown started on the screen. Numbers blinking, the host smiling like she knew she was about to make someone's world explode. My hands rested on my knees, calm, steady. His hands, on the other hand, were shaking, but not from fear. From hunger. The first number rolled out. His head snapped to the TV. Wait, holy sh*T. That's the first one. The second number. He screamed. 2 in a row. Dad, are you seeing this? I nodded slowly. Third number. Fourth. Fifth. By then he was on his feet, yelling, running circles around the living room like a child who'd just been told the world belonged to him. I didn't move. I just watched. And then came the last number. His hands shot to his mouth. He staggered backward, looking at the ticket as if it had turned into a beating heart. "We won," he whispered. Then louder. "We won." I can't explain the sound that followed. It wasn't a laugh. It wasn't a cry. It was a sound soaked in disbelief and greed. It didn't belong to the boy I raised, it belonged to a stranger wearing his face. He called his friends, screaming into the phone, 45 million. 45 freaking million. The house that had once held quiet dinners and quiet conversations suddenly felt too small to contain him. He moved around like a man who'd already left it behind. I stood slowly. "Son," I said, my voice steady, "take a breath." He turned toward me, wild-eyed, flushed with adrenaline. "Do you even get what this means, old man? We're rich." "We." I held on to that word like it might still mean something. But as the minutes stretched, I realized the "we" was disappearing from his mouth like fog burned away by the sun. Within half an hour, the calls started. People who hadn't spoken to him in years suddenly remembered his name. Old friends. Distant cousins. Even a couple of women he'd once chased after. Their laughter poured through the speaker like perfume and poison mixed together. I watched him shift with each call, standing taller, talking louder, using words he never used before. My money. My house. My future. Not ours. His. I walked to the kitchen, leaning against the counter. He came in moments later, still buzzing like an electric wire. He opened the fridge, grabbed a beer, and popped it open without asking. "I'm not staying here," he said casually. "First thing tomorrow, I'm finding a real place. A big house. Pool. Backyard. You know, somewhere that doesn't smell like old furniture." I didn't reply. He took a long drink, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "And I'm buying a car. No, 2 cars. One for me, one for, well, we'll see." He chuckled. Then he looked around the kitchen like it was a stranger's house. "I'm done living like this." There it was, the crack, fully opened. "I thought this was home," I said quietly. He turned, eyebrows raised, a mocking grin stretching across his face. "Home. This is your home. Not mine. I've been stuck here my whole life. That's over now." My chest tightened, not from anger, not even disappointment. Just a quiet kind of heartbreak. He didn't even notice. He was too busy imagining a life where I didn't exist. For the rest of the night, the house was no longer ours. It was a staging ground for his dreams. He played music too loud, made lists of what he'd buy, who he'd call, and how fast he'd leave. His voice got louder with every hour, mine quieter. Around midnight, I went to my room and sat in the dark, listening to the distant echo of his laughter. It was a sound I didn't recognize anymore. But beneath the noise, beneath the hurt, something else began to settle in my chest. Not anger. Not revenge. Just clarity. He didn't understand it yet, but that ticket didn't belong to him. And before the sun rose again, the "we" he had thrown away so carelessly, would no longer include him at all. The sun hadn't even fully risen when the sound of his voice pulled me out of bed. It wasn't the boyish tone I once knew. It was different, louder, sharper, almost rehearsed. I walked down the hallway slowly, the way an old man does when he knows something has already broken before he's even seen the pieces. He was standing in the living room, dressed in clothes that didn't belong to him. Designer sneakers, a jacket I'd never seen before, sunglasses hanging from his shirt like some kind of trophy. There were 2 people with him, his girlfriend and one of those friends who only shows up when money enters the room. The air smelled like champagne and arrogance. "There he is," he said, grinning like he'd just conquered the world. "Morning, old man." I stared at the living room. Balloons. Party hats. Champagne glasses. He'd thrown a celebration in the house before the ink on the ticket had even been verified. My house. My walls. His girlfriend was perched on the arm of the couch, twirling a set of car keys around her finger. She looked at me like I was furniture, something in the way, not someone who belonged. "What's all this?" I asked, my voice quiet. "Celebrating," he said, spreading his arms dramatically. "We're millionaires now." We. That word again. Except I could hear it shrinking with every syllable he spoke. "You don't even have the money yet," I said softly. He laughed like I'd just told a joke. "Oh, come on. It's as good as mine. Just a few signatures, some paperwork, and boom, new life." I heard it then. Mine. Not ours. Mine. He turned to his friend. "We're moving out this afternoon. Already called the realtor. We'll have a new house by the weekend. Something with a pool. Big enough to actually breathe in." My chest tightened, but I stayed still. "And what about me?" I asked. He froze for just a second, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he already had one. He turned slowly, smile fading into something colder. "Dad, look. You've done a lot for me, okay? But things are changing now. I can't keep living like this. You'll be fine here. Or maybe you can move into one of those retirement places or something. You'll be taken care of." My breath caught in my throat. "You want me to leave my own house?" His girlfriend snickered. "Technically, it'll be his soon anyway. You should be happy he's offering to help you out." Her words sliced through me. Not because she said them, but because my son didn't correct her. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, letting her speak for him. "This house," I said slowly, my voice low, steady, "is where you were born. Where your mother and I built a life for you. Where I worked myself to the bone just to keep the lights on. And you're asking me to leave it like it's nothing?" He sighed. Rolled his eyes. "Don't make this dramatic. It's just a house, Dad. And let's be honest, you can't take care of it like you used to. It's time to move on. For both of us." The silence that followed was heavy. I looked at him, really looked at him. The face was the same as the little boy who used to hold my hand, but the eyes weren't his anymore. They belonged to someone else now. Someone who had traded family for fortune before the check had even cleared. My throat burned, but I didn't let it show. I turned slowly, scanning the walls, the photographs, the small details of a life that had been built out of love, not greed. My heart cracked, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. His friend was already loading boxes into the car, humming like a man who had nothing to lose and everything to gain from someone else's wealth. My son was laughing again, clinking glasses with people who had never been there when the world was small and quiet. I stood in the doorway with my old jacket over my arm, feeling the weight of it all pressed down on my shoulders. "So this is it?" I asked quietly. "You're really pushing me out of my own home?" He avoided my eyes for a moment, then shrugged. "It's just better this way. Better for him." He didn't even have the decency to sound guilty. I stepped outside, the early morning air biting against my face. I could still hear their laughter behind me. The door, my door, closed softly, like the final page of a story I hadn't agreed to end. On the front lawn, I paused. I thought I'd feel anger. I thought I'd want to scream. But all I felt was stillness. The kind that comes before a storm, not around you, but inside you. I looked back at the house one last time. I remembered painting those walls with his mother, building the porch, teaching him how to ride his bike in the driveway. This wasn't just a house. It was my life. And he'd just turned it into a stepping stone to something shinier. But here's what he didn't know, what none of them knew. That lottery ticket carried my name. My handwriting. My proof. He thought he'd already won. But he was just standing on borrowed ground. And I was about to take it all back. I walked down the road that morning with a small duffel bag on my shoulder and a storm building behind my ribs. The sky was pale, the kind of color it gets before rain, but the chill I felt didn't come from the weather. It came from everything I just witnessed. My son, my only son, had erased me from the home I built, and he'd done it with the kind of ease only a person who'd already decided to stop seeing you can have. But what he didn't realize was this. I may be old, but I am not weak. I may have been quiet, but I've never been blind. And the one mistake he made, the one mistake that would cost him everything, was thinking the ticket in his hand was his. I walked straight to a small, wood-paneled building tucked behind the old post office, the local claims office for the state lottery. I'd been there only once before, years ago, when a friend had won a small prize. I knew exactly where the counters were, exactly how the process worked. The clerk, a woman with silver hair and tired eyes, looked up from her computer when I entered. "Can I help you?" I took the folded ticket out of my pocket, smoothing it gently between my hands. "I'd like to verify ownership of this ticket," I said. My voice was calm, almost too calm. She took the ticket, examined the back, then looked at me. "This is your name?" "Yes," I said. She nodded and scanned it. Within minutes, the system confirmed what I already knew. My signature. My claim. My legal right. She slid a paper toward me. "You'll need to fill this out if you're filing the claim. This is a major jackpot, sir. Congratulations." For a second, I just stared at the paper. I hadn't come for the thrill of the win. Not really. I came because I needed to stand on solid ground again after being pushed off my own porch. I filled out the forms carefully, making sure everything was perfect. She walked me through the process, step by step. By the time I left the building, I wasn't a man who'd been cast out. I was a man holding a storm in his pocket. I didn't go back home. No. I went to see a lawyer, someone I'd trusted years ago when I wrote my will. His name was David. A good man. Sharp. The kind who spoke softly but hit hard when it mattered. He listened without interrupting as I told him what had happened. Every word. From the way my son looked at me that morning to the sound of the door closing behind me. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, hands steepled under his chin. "Do you have the ticket?" he asked. I placed it on the table. His eyes flicked to my signature and then back to me. "Then this isn't complicated. He has no legal claim. You do." "I don't want to humiliate him," I said quietly. "But I won't let him throw me away." David's gaze hardened. "Then we make sure the law is on your side before he even knows it. We worked through every angle, filing the claim, securing the payout under my name, freezing any attempt from him or anyone else to contest it. David drafted a statement and set up a notification with the Lottery Commission. By the time I walked out of his office, the prize was officially tied to me. My son could scream, cry, or burn down the sky, it wouldn't change the truth. But this wasn't just about money. It was about dignity. And if I was going to take it back, I was going to do it on my terms, not with rage, but with precision. I returned to the small motel room I'd checked into earlier. It wasn't much. 4 walls, a creaky bed, a single window, but it was mine for the night. Quiet. Still. A good place to plan. I took out an old notebook from my bag. I hadn't used it in years, but as I flipped through the yellowing pages, I felt something inside me sharpen. I wrote 3 words on a blank page: "He thinks it's his." Underneath it, I wrote another line: "Make him see the truth." I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to fight. All I needed was one moment, one clean, undeniable moment, to show him that greed had blinded him to the simplest fact of all: you can't steal what was never yours. That night, as the rain finally began to fall against the motel window, I sat in the dark with my hands folded. Not broken. Not angry. Just waiting. He thought he had won. But the real victory was already quietly moving toward him, step by step, signature by signature, under my name. And when it arrived, it wasn't going to knock. It was going to walk through the door and remind him who built the ground he tried to stand on. 2 days later, the house looked different. I hadn't been back since the morning he threw me out, but I could already picture the changes before I even reached the front gate. Balloons had been replaced by expensive decorations, lights strung around like some celebration of wealth, not home. A brand new car sat gleaming in the driveway, something too flashy for this quiet neighborhood. I stood at the end of the walkway for a moment, letting the sight settle over me. The home I built with my hands was no longer warm. It was a showroom. A trophy. And my son was inside, parading around with what he thought was his victory. I didn't bring anger with me. I didn't bring shouting or tears. I brought the truth, and the truth doesn't need to yell to be loud. When I pushed the door open, I was met with music, laughter, and the sound of glasses clinking. The living room was full of people I didn't recognize. Leeching faces. Strangers basking in the glow of money that wasn't theirs. And there he was. My son. Standing in the middle of it all like a king on a fake throne, holding court with a drink in one hand and a shallow grin plastered on his face. When he saw me, his smile faltered. Just slightly. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice too casual to hide the edge underneath. I closed the door gently behind me. "Coming home." His girlfriend laughed, a sharp, shallow sound that echoed against the walls. "Home," she said. "I thought we made it clear." I held up a hand. I didn't need her words. My eyes stayed on him. He stepped closer, lowering his voice like he thought he still had the power in this conversation. "Dad, don't make a scene. This isn't the time." "Funny," I said softly, "you didn't care about scenes when you were throwing me out." He flinched, just barely. Then he tried to smooth it over with that same grin. "Look, things are different now. I've got plans. Big ones. You'll understand one day. I'll take care of you eventually. Just, not here. Not like this." I studied him carefully. The way his eyes darted around, like he wanted this conversation to disappear. He didn't want anyone to see the fracture. "Tell me something," I said. "When you kicked me out of this house, did it feel good?" His jaw tightened. "Don't start." "Because it should," I continued, my voice calm. "That's what you were chasing, right? That feeling. The power. Money in your hands. Control of everything. Your name on the ticket." At that, his shoulders straightened a little. "Yeah," he said. "My name. My life. My win." I let a quiet beat stretch between us, then I pulled the envelope from inside my jacket. The one my lawyer had prepared. Smooth, clean, and devastating. "About that ticket," I said softly. He blinked. "What about it?" I walked past him and set the envelope down on the kitchen counter, the same counter where the ticket had once sat like an afterthought. People around us had quieted, sensing something shift in the air. "It's not yours," I said simply. For a moment, he laughed. A full, disbelieving laugh. "What are you talking about, old man? I bought it. With my money." "No," I said. "With my $10. And more importantly, with my name on the back." His face froze. I kept going. Calm. Precise. I went to the claims office. Filed everything legally. Ownership confirmed. "You never signed it. You never even bothered to check. So, congratulations, son, $45 million, all under my name." The room went silent. The kind of silence that hits like a wave, sucking the air out of everything. He took a step forward, his voice dropping. "You're lying." I met his gaze. "Try me." I opened the envelope slowly and laid out the official claim acknowledgement, stamped and dated. I laid out the statement from the Lottery Commission. I laid out every piece of paper that made this truth undeniable. The laughter that had once filled the room drained away completely. His girlfriend's hand slipped off his arm. His friend's eyes darted toward the door like he was already planning his exit. His face twisted, not with shock, but with something uglier. "You went behind my back." "No," I said, my voice like steel under silk. "You turned your back." "I just stood where you left me." He lunged for the papers, but I stepped forward first, planting my hand firmly on top of them. "You don't get to touch what you threw away." "Dad, listen." "No," my voice cut through the room. Sharp. Unshakable. "You listen to your greed. You listen to your ego. And you let it convince you that the man who raised you, who sacrificed everything for you, was disposable." His mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time since the numbers were drawn, he looked small. I leaned closer, just enough so only he could hear the next words. "I may be old, but I'm not your victim. Not now. Not ever." He stepped back, his eyes wide. I could see the realization carving its way through him like ice in his veins. Around us, people were whispering. The party was crumbling. No one wanted to stand next to a man who had just lost everything he thought was his. I gathered the papers, slipped them back into the envelope, and straightened my shoulders. "Enjoy your little party," I said. "I'm going to collect what actually belongs to me." As I turned to leave, he called out, voice cracking. "Dad! Wait!" I paused at the door, not looking back. "I'll give you some," he shouted. "We can split it. We can work this out." I finally turned to face him. "You threw me out for your everything. Don't beg me for scraps of mine." His face crumpled, not from sorrow, but from the weight of losing control. I stepped outside into the night air. It was cold. Clean. The kind of air that tastes like truth after a storm of lies. Behind me, the music had stopped completely. The house, my house, was no longer his stage. It was nothing but walls around a man who had just learned what betrayal costs. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel weak. I didn't feel old. I felt steady. Because sometimes revenge doesn't need rage. Sometimes all it needs, is the law and your name on the paper. The night after I walked out of that house, the air felt different. Not just because it was cooler, or quieter, but because for the first time in years, the weight on my chest wasn't from what I'd lost, it was from what I'd taken back. I didn't go back to the motel that night. Instead, I drove out to a stretch of highway on the edge of town where the world turns still, and the stars hang low like they're listening. I parked on the shoulder, turned off the engine, and just sat there in the dark. No voices. No music. No greed clawing at my walls. Just silence. I thought about the man my son had become, and the man I used to believe he was. The image of him as a child, muddy knees, gap-toothed smile, arms flung around my neck, kept flashing against the image of him standing in that living room with money in his veins and strangers at his side. Somewhere along the way, he forgot who built the ground he stood on. And for too long, I'd carried the guilt for that. I thought maybe I'd failed him. Maybe I hadn't given him enough. But the truth is, greed isn't something you give a person. It's something they let in. And he had let it in without hesitation. I rolled down the window and let the night air brush against my face. A strange calm settled over me, one that didn't taste like triumph or rage. It tasted like freedom. People think revenge is loud, screaming, shouting, breaking things. But no. Real revenge is quiet. It's the sound of the person who tried to bury you realizing they're the ones without solid ground. It's walking away with your head high while they choke on their own choices. The next morning, I met with David again. The lottery funds were already secured under my name. We set up a trust, ironclad and untouchable. I told him exactly what I wanted. A portion set aside for a foundation in my wife's name. The rest distributed strategically into accounts that only I could access. And not a single cent tied to my son. David gave me a look, not questioning, just understanding. "You're doing the right thing," he said. I nodded. "I'm not punishing him. I'm protecting what's mine." The news traveled fast, of course. By that afternoon, my phone was flooded with calls and texts. Not from him, no, he was silent, but from the same people who had crowded my house like flies around sugar. Suddenly, everyone wanted to talk, to reconnect, to celebrate. I turned my phone off. I wasn't interested in vultures. That evening, I stood in front of my house one last time. The house I'd built with my own hands, the one that had carried laughter, struggle, pain, love, and, recently, betrayal. It didn't look like home anymore. It looked like a memory dressed in someone else's clothes. The blinds were drawn. The music was gone. The balloons and banners had been ripped down after the party imploded. The porch light was off. He was still inside. I knew it. Probably pacing. Probably realizing just how little he actually had. I walked up the steps, touched the railing I'd sanded smooth years ago, and whispered to myself, this was mine before it was his dream. I didn't need the house anymore. I didn't need to fight for walls that had already absorbed too much noise. The real victory wasn't in taking the house back. It was in taking myself back. I sold it a week later. Quietly. Cleanly. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about refusing to let it hold me hostage. The money from the sale joined the rest of the winnings. And with that, the last physical tie to his betrayal was cut. I moved into a small place by the coast, not flashy, not extravagant. Just a quiet cabin with wide windows and the sound of waves folding against the shore. A place where no one knocked on my door for money. A place where the silence belonged to me. One afternoon, while unpacking a few old boxes, I found an old photo of him when he was 5. He was sitting on my shoulders, laughing so hard his eyes were squeezed shut. I stared at that photo for a long time. People change. Sometimes in ways that leave bruises you can't see. But I realized something standing there with that photo in my hand, I wasn't broken. He'd tried to take everything, my house, my dignity, even the home we shared. But in trying to bury me, he'd revealed something far stronger inside me. Strength isn't in holding on. It's in knowing when to walk away without letting their betrayal define your ending. Loudspeaker. And if you've ever been betrayed by someone who should have loved you the most, subscribe. Because stories like mine aren't just about pain. They're about taking back what's yours. As the sun sank behind the water that night, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea in my hands and a breeze on my face. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anyone to come home. I was home. It's strange how quiet feels different when you've earned it. For months, that house, the one my son had tried to claim as his kingdom, echoed with other people's voices, their greed, their noise. Now, in my new place by the coast, the only sound that fills the air is the soft break of the tide and the occasional gull in the distance. For the first time in years, my mornings belong to me again. No slamming doors. No raised voices. No tension simmering beneath every conversation. Just me, my tea, and the steady rhythm of the waves rolling in. The world thinks a lottery win changes everything. But the truth is, it just exposes everything. It strips people bare, shows you exactly what matters to them. For my son, it wasn't love. It wasn't family. It was power. And the moment he thought he had it, he used it to throw me out of the very life I built. But power built on greed is fragile. The weeks that followed the confrontation passed quietly. He didn't call me. Not once. Pride is a loud thing, and it keeps people from facing the mirror. But word travels in a small town, and eventually, I started hearing whispers. The people who'd crowded around him like bees to honey, vanished. The fancy car? Gone. Repossessed. The realtor? Stopped returning calls. He didn't have access to a single cent of that money. He never did. And without the money, the people who pretended to love him melted away like snow in the sun. I didn't take pleasure in his downfall. Not really. What I felt was quieter than that. It was a kind of closure. A reminder that when someone builds their entire identity around something they never truly owned, the collapse is inevitable. I spent my days setting up the foundation I'd told David about. In my wife's name. She was the kind of woman who believed in giving quietly. No fanfare, no noise. Just kindness that left fingerprints no one could erase. A piece of the winnings would go to that foundation, helping single parents, children who grew up the way my boy once did, before greed whispered in his ear. I didn't want the money to become a monument to pain. I wanted it to mean something real. One crisp afternoon, I sat on my porch watching the sea when my phone buzzed. A name I hadn't seen in weeks. My son. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. Then I answered. His voice was thin. Not the arrogant tone I'd heard the day he threw me out. Not the slick confidence from the night of the party. Just, empty. Dad, he said softly. I messed up. There it was. No excuses. No deflection. Just the raw sound of someone who finally realized the cost of their choices. I didn't gloat. I didn't tell him I told you so. I just listened. He told me how everyone had left. How the house felt like a hollow shell. How he couldn't sleep. How he'd spent his days trying to figure out where it all went wrong. Do you hate me? He asked. I looked out at the horizon, the orange glow of sunset reflecting off the water. No, I said quietly. But I don't trust you. Not anymore. Silence. Then a shaky breath. I don't expect you to, he whispered. I want to fix it. I didn't give him promises. I didn't hand him forgiveness wrapped in a ribbon. I told him the truth. This isn't something words can fix, son. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. And love isn't a tool you can pick up when everything else falls apart. He cried then. And maybe years ago, I would have rushed to fix it. But now, I understood something, he had to sit with his choices. I didn't need to punish him. Life had already done that for me. When I hung up, I didn't feel lighter or heavier. Just, steady. In the months that followed, I started building a life that had nothing to do with his shadow. I traveled a little. Visited places my wife and I had once dreamed of seeing. I spent mornings in quiet cafes, afternoons by the water, evenings reading old books that smelled like memory. Every so often, I'd hear from him again. Sometimes he'd ask about my day. Sometimes he'd just sit in silence on the other end of the line. I never turned him away, but I didn't give him what he'd thrown away either. Trust would have to be earned this time. And maybe it will be. Or maybe it won't. But either way, I've already taken my life back. Loudspeaker, and if you've ever had someone betray you, someone you gave everything to, remember this, their greed isn't your weight to carry. Take back what's yours. And if this story resonated with you, make sure you subscribe. I watched the last light of the day fade into the water. For years, I'd built everything around my son. My home. My future. My hope. But standing here now, with the sea breathing steady in front of me, I realized something simple and beautiful. I wasn't just a father who'd been betrayed. I was a man who survived it. And this time, the peace was mine alone.